Hi, and the topic for today is flying on Argus. Of course, we're not got flying on Argus. We're not going to get it either. I've already sort of discussed this a little bit, but I haven't done a video on it. And I thought I should probably do one because Blizzard, in the form of a community manager, have been discussing it at length with people on the North American forums in a way that I've never seen before. This is like the most extended back and forth discussion I think I've ever seen on any topic. I could go into but you do sometimes get these little, on a much smaller scale, back and forth discussions like this, only on North American forums. Of course, I could go off on one and moan about EU interaction again, but I'm not going to, because the issue of flying here, we'll start off with the first post. I'm going to put the images up here. These are from MMO Champion, just because it's more convenient. I will put a link in the description below to the original forum piece so you can read it through yourself. There might be more added by the time I've finished this one as well. But just to point out here that the blue responses are from a community manager, not a developer, but of course, community manager working at Blizzard, which means, you know, not just for Blizzard, but at Blizzard HQ, which means that they do have some interaction with developers as well. So the main argument here is, and before I start this, I should probably say where I stand on this, because everyone has biases. I'm obviously going to try and present this in a very unbiased way and play devil's advocate. But, you know, I have my own opinion on this. My opinion on flying is that it's nice when you get it as a convenience. Sometimes you get to see nice scenes that you wouldn't get to see were there no flying. That being said, I can also see certain advantages. There's certain things that Blizzard developers can put into the game that there's no point in them if you've got flying. Having flying at level cap, I've never seen the point in having flying at level cap, because it's one of those things, either you put flying in as soon as the expansion comes out, or sort of not at all, because what are we doing? Inconvenience ourselves while we level? That doesn't take that long. And then after that, any awkward little quests or places to get to, we can easily just fly to it anyway. That being said, some people do really like flying. Some for the convenience, they sort of demand the convenience, and it's been in the game for so long. Some people, it's for other reasons as well. There are more reasons for flying than just convenience, which is what the argument here seems to be. So the argument goes here that the zone is so drab and really feels like there's nothing more than Broken Shore 2.0. Same atmosphere, scenery, just too much mob density. And this is the key point. This is the one I have a lot of sympathy for. It says, we spent months earning Pathfinder just to have flying removed yet again, which you effectively have. You know, you've gone all the way through patch 7.0, I suppose you'd call it, in 7.1. And it's when 7.2 came out, if you already had those achievements completed, and many had not, but you had the opportunity. So for all those who had those achievements completed, you were able to get flying pretty soon after 7.2 came out, almost immediately, because there wasn't that much extra to do. And then you had your flying. 7.3 comes out. Although we've still got flying in those areas, we're going to the new zones. We're encouraged to spend almost all the time in those new zones, and we don't have flying. So for those who really want flying, I can see how it looks like you've had flying for one patch, and that's it. It will especially seem the case as soon as the new raid comes out. In fact, the new dungeon hasn't even come out yet, but certainly, I mean that's a thing in itself. When the new dungeon comes out, of course, you won't be flying to that. But when the new raid comes out for raiders, again, it's going to be much more like going back to, I suppose, Emerald Nightmare, where you're going to actually be riding to it. The response here is, I think plenty of folks disagree with you on the first point. We're not going to get into how many agree or disagree. I've said before, I'll say it again, Blizzard themselves never do any surveys of this sort of thing. Do people like it or not? So no one knows. Blizzard don't know, we don't know. We can only guess. We can only use anecdotal evidence on both sides of the argument. It says, and Argus has been one of the best parts of Legion to me personally. Again, it's one of these things where you can sort of see the debating tactics used, but it's completely irrelevant to them personally. Apart from anything else, they are representing Blizzard. And even if we don't ascribe to them the qualities of a liar, you would certainly say it makes no difference what you personally think. What matters is what the customers on large think. It says, but just to clarify on the second, it says, this is nothing new. Now, this is fair enough. It says, we don't have any plans to change this forward. New zones added in patch content have never, it says, to their knowledge, had flying allowed. Now, we can sort of go through these. They talk themselves about in TBC. Now, there was no flying at all in vanilla, of course. So even though new zones were added and expanded, there was no flying there. So that makes no difference. TBC, there was a new zone added. You had the Isle of Keldanas. And it says flying was not available on the Isle of Keldanas when it released in 2.4. I could sort of argue with that one that it was probably just an extension of, for whatever other reason, you know, because it was sort of on Azeroth, that was probably the reason. I don't think it was a conscious philosophy not to allow flying. I think it was just because it was attached to other zones where flying wasn't allowed, because flying was only allowed on Outland. But nonetheless, that was certainly a zone that was added in and didn't have flying. The same is true of Isle of Thunder and Timeless Isle from 5.2 and 5.4. That was in MOP. These zones have always been about exploration with a bit of danger, and Argus fits quite nicely into that theme. You could certainly argue historically, of course, new zones have not had flying in them. Whether you say that there was a conscious philosophy not to allow it all the way through those is debatable. It's possible. Certainly the Timeless Isle, definitely, because the Timeless Isle, I suppose Isle of Thunder as well to a lesser extent, but the Timeless Isle definitely was about exploration. There's no argument about that. And if you had flying, all of those little things they put in would have been completely pointless because you would just fly to them. So all of the rope walking and working out how to get from one place to another, completely pointless. Then it goes on to say, I can understand that you may have recently earned Pathfinder and want to fly. It says, but no one is stopping. This is always the bad argument. No one is stopping you from flying anywhere you want over the Broken Isles, but this is Argus. You know, and this is where it sort of breaks down their argument a little bit. It's like saying, you know, yeah, but this is Argus. This is a different place, so it's okay to not allow flying. It's like, no. Bearing in mind, during Warlords of Draenor, Blizzard tried to say there's not going to be flying in the game ever again. Like, literally ever. It was like, Warlords of Draenor has not been designed to have flying. They didn't tell people this in advance. This was partway through the expansion when this was announced. We're not having flying. That's all there is to it ever again. Huge backlash. Immediately, Blizzard backtracked and said, okay, we'll have flying, but it's going to take us a while. Of course it was going to take us a while because they hadn't designed the zones with flying in mind. People think it's like a switch you can turn on and off. No, it's not, because they will use 2D art to give the impression of a 3D world. As long as you can't actually get to it, it sort of works. And this is used in spades on Argus. You can. It's like watching a play in a theatre where you've got the backdrops, and it's like moaning that the actors aren't walking away into the mountains because it's just a painting. And it's very much like that on Argus as well. But there's other aspects of zones where it's not. I mean, on Argus it's very obvious. I sort of think, no disrespect to the art team, but I think it was very... I don't think there was a lot of time and resources allowed for it. Because one thing I will say is the Argus zones themselves, if they were zones at the start of an expansion, as part of an expansion, you would be sorely disappointed with them. They are nothing like the quality we are used to of the major zones of an expansion. The reason why we sort of let it slip is I think, for two reasons. One, we're not used to getting multiple new zones in the middle of an expansion anyway, so we're sort of okay with it. And secondly, Argus is mostly about, it's storyline driven as a patch. It's a big storyline driven patch. So the fact that the zones are very rough and ready is, I think, for a lot of people, certainly myself, I mean, I can only speak personally, I suppose, and anecdotally, is okay. We're sort of okay with it. There isn't any wide-scale moaning about that. But the nature of it means that they, even if there was a massive backlash, and every single player, to a man, woman and child, said, we want flying, and we want you to get straight onto it on Argus, Blizzard probably couldn't do that. They'd have to build up the zones from scratch, and they wouldn't have time to do that. So I think it's physically impossible. And then he goes into rambling about all sorts of nonsense here. Argus isn't supposed to be a friendly and hospitable place, and I wouldn't bet my gold on a demon sitting down for tea with me anytime soon. What sort of argument is that exactly? Most of the zones are not very hospitable. That's how we get experience. We kill things. And yet we can fly in them. In fact, I can think of much less hospitable zones where we can fly than Argus. It says, if you're having trouble and find it difficult to get around and avoid pitfalls, then Argus is working as intended. Again, it's falling into the trap here, or maybe deliberately just trying to turn the argument that way, that the flying is about convenience. For some people, it is about convenience. For some people, they actually like flying. They just like flying. Next one. And this is, again, very to and fro. We'll try to get through some more a bit more quickly. It says, with all due respect, you guys are understanding the issue. Before, when new patch content was released without flying, we had flying since the moment we hit max level. So we actually got to enjoy it for quite a while before it was taken away. Now it's taken away very shortly after most people have earned it. Doesn't feel nearly so good. So I absolutely agree with that argument. Okay, again, it is the time thing. If you'd have had flying right from the start, and I understand why you don't, by the way. And as I say, I am a supporter of not having flying from the start. But if you did have it, then it would be less of a problem that 3 zones that are just there for one patch. Because after this patch, who knows, we might be back to the Broken Shore anyway. So for just one patch, we go to a place where there's no flying. Is not that big a deal. But here's where, you know, the community manager sort of says something a bit weird, but not really attacked here. The problem as well with a forum argument like this as well is, like in a normal debate, you'll try and catch people out. You'll try and, you know, attack a line of what they've said. But the problem with a forum argument like this is, if you do catch someone out and you do trap them, they can just choose not to respond to that comment, and so you can't win on that way. But what I would have looked at here is it's saying, I do understand the issue. They're putting speech mark for some reason, but we don't see it as an issue. You're not on the Broken Isles anymore. You know, I would say, so you understand the issue, but you don't see it as an issue. So either it's an issue or it's not. If you're saying that it's not an issue, then you don't understand the issue, because you're saying there is no issue. And if you do understand the issue, you can't say you don't see it as an issue. This is a complete mess of a sentence, really. It's like, you know, you can say that you can see the issue, but you think on the balance of all things that it's better the way it's done. That's fine. That's fair enough. But you can't say, I understand the issue, but there isn't an issue. It's a bit like saying to someone, I understand you have a cat, but there's no such thing as cats. What? It says, I think we'd probably try to avoid things like this being so close together in the future, but it's just a symptom of timing as far as I'm aware. So perhaps what they're saying at that point is, we hadn't really thought about it at the time. Maybe you've got a point. Maybe, you know, we'll think about that in future and try to avoid that situation occurring. On the next one, it says, well, perhaps it's time for the development team to acknowledge that flight is actually part of the game and develop content with the idea that we can fly, rather than take the mindset of, we don't like flight, so we're going to restrict it, even after making people jump through hoops, blah, 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 blah. The genie's out the bottle. This is a phrase I absolutely agree with. I mean, that is the problem. Like, for me, if I could go back, I'm sure if the developers could go back, they'd do the same thing as well. Because I see so many advantages in not flying. You know, I remember vanilla zones, the original vanilla zones, not these cataclysm abominations. Vanilla zones, better than any zone ever since. And yet I'm not harping back nostalgia-wise, but I just remember them better. Not because I spent more timing them, because each game and expansion has taken roughly the same amount of time. Obviously, I didn't spend very much time in Wrath and Kata, but the other ones have been more recent. But I know the vanilla ones, even though I can't go to them now because they don't exist, better, because I had to think about the way I got around. Then they brought flying in TBC. They could have, and they kept it on Outland. It made sense on Outland. It's a shattered world. Then for Wrath, they could have just taken it away again. They could have said, no, it was a TBC thing. Some people may have chuntered. Most people would have just got on. And by now, of course, people, if they'd have stuck to their guns there, it would have been fine. But they put flying in again, and again, and again, and again. So it's like they say, the genie's out of the bottle. It is now a core part of the game that you get flying. They have gone, I think, they've pushed it as far as they can to make us wait for it. Because that way it allows the people that design the zones to put nice little intricate things in and make interesting terrain. Because why would you bother making interesting terrain if it's only going to last the few days that it takes people to level? You wouldn't. You'd just make it as boring as the Argus zones are now. So you put in nice intricate landscapes that people can enjoy or not enjoy if they don't like not having flying. And then, you know, you bring your flying in later on when everyone... And you make people do all the exploration stuff as well. So you're forcing people to do the content that you've slaved over, and everyone's content if not happy. But yeah, the genie's out of the bottle. You can't sort of remove it. This feels like, this Argus thing feels to me like a bit of a middle finger. It's a bit like, right, we were forced to go back on what we said we wanted to do. We've been forced to keep flying in the game. So we're going to make them take 8 or 9 months before they ever get flying. That's a bit of a way of preserving a bit of respect on this one, or dignity, whatever you want to call it. But then for Legion, I've got a plan. What we'll do, right? This will be a good laugh. We'll give them flying for a few months. Then we'll bring out some new zones where they've got to go, because that's where all the best stuff is. That's where most of the artifact power is and all the best gear. And we won't have flying on it. That'll sort them out. That'll teach them to be awkward. It's sort of how it feels to me. And it says here, that guy says, I remember Lich King and the idea that we could fly early, and we flew and we had fun. It was okay. Well, with Lich King, you sort of had to fly as well. There were places where you couldn't get to if you didn't fly. And there were other places that were bloody awkward to get to if you couldn't fly. And I mean, I don't just mean tricky. I mean awkward in a way that hasn't been in most of the expansions. It says, why exactly do developers feel that only by restricting flight can they give us new things? And then the argument goes here. We can say buzz phrases like the genie is out of the bottle all day. Well, it's not really a buzz phrase. It is very apt. But it doesn't get us anywhere. I think it's been well acknowledged that we are still open to the idea of flight, or we wouldn't have flight in any content at all. No. Well, I would attack that immediately and say, no, you tried to have no flight. You actually said, Blizzard actually said, there is not going to be flying ever again in the game. And 3 days later, whatever it was within a week, went, okay. What was quite funny is sometime later they tried to claim that they never said there would be no flying. It was a bit of a stupid thing to do because it was in type. You put it on the internet, it's there. So, but yeah, so that argument, again, doesn't wash at all. It's almost like you're trying to argue not with the person you're arguing with, but with everyone else watching. You know, like a politician's trick. You know you can't win the argument with the person you're debating with, but that doesn't matter. You're just trying to win over the audience. Because it feels like that, because Blizzard, for anyone who's been paying attention to what they've been doing for the last few years, knows perfectly well that the developers, and again, I have sympathy for this, I'm on their side, in a manner of respect, don't want flying in the game. It says, we moved to meet the community in the middle. That's what Pathfinder has been about. So, you know, they're acknowledging that. It says, again, it's a contradiction. It says, we're open to the idea of flight. Oh, but we've met the community in the middle. Meeting someone in the middle means that you have a very different view to the other side. So meeting in the middle is you can have flying for some of the expansion. That's what Pathfinder has been about. Earn your wings, show you've achieved completion of the content overall, and you can fly. Which is a silly thing to say, because immediately someone could then say, so why don't you put a Pathfinder on Argus then? It says there's not really an attitude of closed-mindedness on the topic from the development team. I beg to differ there. We've had plenty of, and I'm not saying that I don't disagree. It says we've had plenty of positive discussions on the direction of flying overall. I do think, however, that there are folks in the community who are closed-minded to entertain the idea of maybe you shouldn't be able to fly around and skip all the content when new areas are released. I think these conversations need to be a two-way street, and the more we have everyone in the community calling the development team closed-minded or pointing fingers, the further we get from the amicable understanding within the community. To which I would say, why not actually have surveys in-game then? Again, I'll keep beating that drum. Why do we not have surveys? Asking people. Not trying to see, oh, loads of people do that content, must be popular. Never mind the fact that people feel compelled to do it. Actually ask people, how much do you enjoy doing this content on a scale of 1 to 5 or whatever it is? You know, and you could even ask questions like, how much do you enjoy not having flying on Argus? But they don't. And I like it, as I say, you know. The next one that goes on about Tanan. I'm not going to go through all of these because this will take forever. But I will put the link in the description below, as I say, to the one if you want to watch it yourself. Or watch it, I say. It's like watching it, isn't it? Like watching a soap opera. Read it. Tanan, wonder why you forgot about Tanan. So this is a good point. Coming back to that Every zone that has been added in the game has not had flying. Well, Tanan Jungle in Warlords of Draenor, of course, did have flying. Of course, it could be argued, from Blizzard's point of view, that they didn't want flying in WoD at all. So, although, yes, they brought out Tanan Jungle as a new zone, and it had flying, they didn't want flying anywhere in Tanan Jungle. The other thing it could be argued, I suppose, is that the Pathfinder sort of, I think it covered Tanan as well. So when Tanan came out, you had to earn your stripes to be able to fly there as well. But nonetheless, it was a new zone that had flying in it. And the Blizzard said here, Tanan was technically a part of the original overworld of Draenor. It wasn't added in a patch. A door was just opened via your shipyard in patch. Which is, again, a really silly thing to say. Because, I mean, we all know that Tanan Jungle was, of course, supposed to be in the original version. This was just, you know, because WoD was messed up so much, a lot of content wasn't ready at release and all the rest of it that was intended to be, and then they abandoned a whole load of it later on. But again, it's, you know, it's still it's coming up with excuses, really, isn't it? You know, it's like saying, oh, well, no patch. We did say to their knowledge, but it's a no new zone during an expansion as flying. Well, here is one that does. And it's saying, oh, yes, well, that was a special case because of shipyard. What? I don't think they're quite equitable for a number of reasons, from how they are accessed. What? Really? The number of zone, like how they are accessed. They are accessed by moving into that zone. The same as any other zone is accessed. Maybe they're trying to argue, oh, well, Isle of Keldenash had to sort of go through a portal. Well, you didn't have to, but that was the best way. Isle of Thunder, yeah, you had to go through a portal there. Didn't really with the Timeless Isle. I mean, you had to get there to begin with. You could then fly there, but it was connected. There was another, I mean, there was the Isle of Giants as well, wasn't there? Where you couldn't fly. And that was directly connected as well. Although I think that was there at the start of MoB. The number of zones, I don't know what they're talking about, number of zones. It's not equitable from a number of reasons. How they are accessed, so that's, I think, the nonsense. The number of zones, what is that to do with anything? How invasions and world quests function, etc. I'm not quite sure whether he's talking about Tanan here or Argus. If he's talking about Argus, again, you can argue. I mean, there's loads of arguments for why flying couldn't work. First of all, as I say, I think it's a technical thing. I think, you know, Argus is like that stage where you're setting a play and it's just got painted backdrops. There's so many of them and they're so obvious that there's no way there's not much 3D about Argus. There's no way you could get flying. The other thing is, of course, that all three zones are not really directly connected. You can't move from one to the other. That's why we have to teleport about, which is nice for some people by their teleporting. But the teleporting is also just a technical thing, isn't it? You couldn't have a taxi like a griffin or a hippogriff or whatever the flying beastie on Argus would be, because they're not actually connected. You can't actually get from one direct to the other. They are three completely independent zones. So again, to have flying would be to expose that, because you'd have to put them all in bubbles. You still couldn't get from one zone to another. Now, of course, they could have put all three zones together. The fact that they're not together is a design thing. It's not a natural consequence of the way it has to be. They could have all been geographically linked, but they are not. And then it says here, I hope you're saying with timing and not rolling back on content releasing faster. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to pick too many faults with this one. Again, this is a community manager potentially answering some things they maybe didn't have to. I'm not going to criticise them for getting involved in debate and putting as many answers into it as they did. I think the fact that they did also indicates that Blizzard are aware that the flying is a very contentious issue, and they do very much want to put their point across, because they know it's a potential banana skin now, and it is going to be for every expansion from here on in, because this debate is just going to keep coming backwards and forwards. So again, they're just making it clear it's their personal opinion. But I think in terms of spacing, the fact that flight landed really close to the launch of 7.3 was unfortunate timing. I get why people are upset to have just earned flying and now it's taken away. Because the other thing we have to bear in mind is, you know, I might have got flying as soon as 7.2 launched pretty much. Many people did not. Many people had barely started, if they had at all, the achievements. And it's only when flying became available that they went, oh, we can have flying, can we? Right, and they may have taken some time. And some of them may literally have only just got flying. And it's like, right, got flying. Oh, we're going to Argus now. Oh, me mount doesn't work. What? So, yeah, I think, you know, again, if Blizzard learned from that, then we can give them some credit for that one. Also, this point, coming back to Isle of Keldanas, someone has made the very good point. How much of the terrain in Isle of Keldanas was made to intentionally impede you? Or in the time, I think for Timeless Isle, some of it was because some of it was the exploration was a big part of it. But Isle of Keldanas, absolutely not. It was as flat as a pancake, and it just went round in a circle. There was a big road that took you everywhere. Every point of interest was on a road. In fact, so much so, Isle of Keldanas was the first time I ever got myself a second account for convenience sake. I created another character, and to do the quests, the daily quests. I just had both characters on at once, as I sometimes do in like Legion. So I used to put one character on follow on my main, and I'd just go around doing the quest. And because the terrain was so flat, it was very easy to do that. You know, you just put them on follow, go around, do all the quests, get 2 done at the same time. And then here, so the response here is, well, Keldanas was pretty much of an experiment of its time. Well, isn't every new feature an experiment of its time? But it did have a good bit of terrain to get around. No, it didn't. There were slopes, but they were gentle. There was no terrain that you would call. Like I said, I used to just put, have one character on follow on the other. It says, especially for the dailies on the east side of the islands with the Nugget and such now. Argus is massive compared to Keldanas. Altogether it is. So most points comparing them are pretty moot. No, it's not. Again, you're just trying to argue, oh, it's different. That's a bit like saying, oh, Keldanas was largely green. Argus was there's a lot of green on Argus, but it's a different shade of green. So it's a completely different case. These arguments do crop up a lot. There's a lot of debating techniques that people use that don't wash with anyone who's experienced in actual debating. Because on the internet you can get away with them. Like in actual debating, there's someone there and you respond to them and they've got to respond to you. So they can't wriggle out with any of these silly little points. But on the internet thing, you sort of get away with it because you can make a stupid point, and then if someone comes back and points out the stupidity of the point, which no one here, to be fair, does, they're probably wise to it, you just ignore that comment, don't you? So there's no such thing as really a proper internet debate. But yeah, so this is a typical thing, the typical debating point, which is, oh, this is not the same situation at all. It's like, yes, it is. Because remember, it was the community manager themselves who brought up the issue of past expansion zones. So why was Keldanas a relevant comparison with Argus when he was making the point, but it's not anymore? Not nonsense, isn't it? Absolute nonsense. I don't think the terrain was made to intentionally impede you by way of making you frustrated, as you can easily teleport to any subzone of all 3 zones. But rather it wants you to not charge headfirst into everything and actually explore. I charge headfirst into everything. That is by far the easiest way to do it. In fact, it's the only way to do it because there's quite a lot of Argus where you have to do that. Because there's so many mobs, as people have pointed out, the mob density is so high, you would spend ages if you stopped and fought everything. So you have to go. And if you're going to go through a load of mobs, it's going to be too many for you. It's not... I mean, obviously, I'm a very well-geared Retribution paladin. I should get away with it. But generally speaking, you've got to go for it. You've got barely any idea where you go. You've got a rough idea of some direction you're going to go in. You're going to go through and hope that most of them snap back before you pick up too many. Or they knock you off your horse. So it says, if that's how we wanted the game to be played, we'd have probably just have a flat plain with a couple of trees here or there. No. You wouldn't, because if you had a flat plain with trees here or there, people wouldn't have to rush headlong into it. They would just go from point A to B. Whereas here, we've got to cover large distances through a lot of mobs. So yeah, I think it does encourage you to just go train mobs, go mad. The most frustrating part of Argus for me has been the area between the Spirit Crucible, don't know what that is, and the entrance to Antorus and the Antoran Waste. Vague recollection of where that is. With the Demon Counts, Bridges and Fell Flows. The Fell Flows, yeah, fair enough. I mean, they're sometimes a little bit awkward. But rejoice, everyone. Pets don't take damage in them now. But I found that I was always looking for a shortcut and jumping off ledges instead of taking the route that was laid in front of me. There is no route laid in front of you. Of course you jump off ridges. If you come to the top of a ridge and where you want to get is below the ridge, of course you're going to jump off. What sort of comment's that? Is it just me? Is that supposed to mean something that I'm missing? Once I stopped doing that and learned other paths to the areas, I was having a much better time. Why? Why wouldn't you just go off the ridge if it's quicker? I'm not going to criticise for the sake of criticising, but I don't get that at all. Then here, obviously a comment like this is not going to elicit any sort of sensible response. I'm surprised it elicited any response at all. There was no need to, it's nice of, was it Onyx or something like that, the community manager's name, to spend as much time as they did responding on this thing, but you don't have to respond to something like this. Establishing a history of bad decisions doesn't make it right. It says your one-liner is nice and all, but I'd appreciate if you could explain to me why those were bad decisions retrospectively. I think they already did, but never mind. Yet it's not a core game feature, someone says. It's a convenient feature that saves time daily on an MMO. I never thought of it as a core feature. Well, this is what I'm trying to say as well. Different people have different ideas about the benefits of flying. It says, as the game doesn't require us to have flying to progress anywhere, you can easily play the full game without flying, and you can play it with flying. That does not make it a core feature if you don't require it to finish the game. And then blah, blah, blah. This is the old debating trick again. This is semantics. Anyone who uses the word semantics in a debate has lost the argument. That's just something people say when they can't think of anything to say. Oh, you're just arguing semantics. Says, but I'd agree that flying is not a core game feature. But of course, many people will say that it is a core game feature. I mean, what is a core game feature if not flying? The community sees it as what, again, lumping everyone together. The community sees it as one for convenience. Not everyone. Some people see it for other things. Some people like the feeling of flying. They like to be able to see the different zones. They like to be able to see the scenery from a different perspective. But in terms of design, the game, I mean, for me, it's convenience. That's all it is. And for many others, it is as well. But it's not for everyone. But in terms of design, the game plays the same with and without. And that's not true. If it were true, they wouldn't have such a big deal about having flying straight from the start. The game doesn't play the same. A lot of the exploration type things where you've got to work your way how to get round up to various places in High Mountain, for example, or you've got to work out how to circumnavigate that bloody druid area before it puts you to sleep, which the druids claim is something to do with Emerald Nightmare, I don't care, or going over the hunt, you're getting around the Hunter's Lodge without falling, getting kicked out and stuff like that. All of that stuff is a part of the game, and it's massively improved with flying. Not just the speed of which you can get around these places, but it's much easier because all you do is go around the place you're not supposed to go to, or you can just go from A to B if there isn't anything in the way that you can't go over. Whereas when you're moving without flying, you have to try and work out and you have to explore and stuff like that. So no, there is a big difference. But it says in terms of the design of the game, plays the same with and without, which I don't agree with. So it's pretty far from what I'd consider core. But no, I completely disagree with that. It says, in my opinion, now this is someone who's supporting it, of course. We have to put one of these in, of course, for balance. In my opinion, anyone who quits because of no flying on Argus, and I doubt there will be many, was on their way out the door anyway. We don't know that. It is interesting to note, I mean, people will play a different game for different reasons. World of Warcraft is one of the very few, I do note, not the only one, what people keep saying, but it is one of the very, very few MMO type games where there is flying at will. Okay, where you can actually have a flying mount and go explore. That, for those for whom that is appealing, that actually could be a pretty good reason to play World of Warcraft. People would be, I mean, I don't know, people always seem to see other people through the prism of their own desires. And they don't really, they think to themselves, well, these are the features of the game that are very good for me, so therefore everyone must have the same opinion. No. Some people will play a game for the silliest of reasons. I, have an account and pay a monthly subscription for Lord of the Rings Online because it's Tolkien's world. I quite like the fact that there's a game where I can explore Middle-earth. That's it. That's the one reason. There's so many other things I've said before that are not great about it, but that is the one thing that is really good about it. And I will pay, even in a given month, I might not even play it. Like at the moment where I'm busy with World of Warcraft, I'm still keeping it up. And some people might do the same World of Warcraft. They just like the feeling of flying. Now, this person says, I'm very glad we're grounded on Argus because all flying really does is make the game feel small. That is certainly an argument there. That, you know, when you're moving around an area really quickly, it does make it feel much smaller. It is always small anyway. First thing I did when I got my very first epic mount as a paladin, which was, the final bit was in Scholar Mount, so it's quite far north in the Eastern Kingdoms. The first thing I did was ride all the way down to Booty Bay. Now, that took a while, but not nearly as long as it should do if it were a realistic continent that spans much of the world from north to south. Should have taken weeks or months. But in actual fact, I went down and, you know, it took less than an hour. The game already is fairly small for those reasons. And yes, flying, of course, makes it feel much smaller. It says, just because this... Oh, they're talking about the community manager. Just because this isn't even worth your time with how stupid some of these people are. Again, no real need for that. No one else at this point, bear in mind, has taken to personally insulting people that just have a different point of view. I could have used a meaner word. Well, it's mean enough to call people stupid just because they disagree with you. I don't even understand how people seem to think flying is so important. Again, it's like, because you don't understand it doesn't mean other people don't. Like, I keep saying, I would have preferred the game if it had never had flying or if it had been kept to TBC. I think it would have been better. That's my opinion. I don't call people stupid if they have the opposite opinion. Because, you know, and if you can't understand it, then that says more about your own intellectual capacity than it does the people who have that opinion, is what I would say. So it says, someone even said it's a core feature when 0% of the game requires us to fly to complete it. That's not necessarily... I mean, again, you can now argue about what is a core feature of the game. I would say that a core feature of the game is something that you associate with that game. Like some people, there's plenty of core features of the game that you don't need. We don't need, as people have pointed out very recently now, there's no point in having equipment that is colour-coded, white, green, blue, purple, orange. What's the point? Everyone's just wearing purple and orange. But that's a core part of the game. They're not going to change it. There's several other things that are core parts of the game that just will not change, even though they're now pointless and sometimes even, you know, have a negative effect on the game. Yes, but again, that's just arguing again about how we define what is a core part of the game. It says, anyway, I just think we need to meet in the middle and be civil. Again, meeting in the middle, you know, was supposed to be, remember, you can't have flying for the first 8 or 9 months, then you can have flying. So what you've got to bear in mind is, some people are now looking at it as, you can't have flying for the first 8 or 9 months, then you can have flying for another 2 or 3 months, then you can't have flying again. That's not really meeting in the middle from some people's point of view. Meeting in the middle for a lot of people seems to be, I've already moved a nanometer, therefore we've met in the middle. Because we are at some point between where you want to be and where I want to be. At the same time, I am quite pleased that the community manager at this point also did sort of say, well, no, you know, these people do have an opinion and it's fine to have that opinion and all the rest of it. And then on the last one, just for completeness, just because I've gone through all the statements so far, I might as well go through this one. Again, you know, a pointless thing to say, even though it's true. And again, I'm amazed it shouldn't have had any sort of response, really. It says, you're a Blizzard employee, you have to agree with everything they do, at least publicly here on the forums. To which they say, I don't have to agree with everything we do. Remember what they said is, you have to agree at least publicly here on the forums. I don't have to agree with everything they do. Yes, you do. It says, I have a personal opinion, but your personal opinion is not allowed to appear on these forums, that I've expressed many times about content through Legion and beyond. I won't believe that. Obviously, I can't categorically say this is not the case, but I'm going to be fairly sure, I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that this particular community manager, nor any other, has ever criticised Blizzard design or policy in their official capacity on the forums. I mean, who's allowed to do that? I'm not allowed to do that at my work. I have personal opinions, but I don't express them publicly about my workplace. Why would I? And it's the same here. So, but anyway, that's that finished. But there we go. There's the issues on flying sort of addressed there via one of the more senior community managers that works at Blizzard HQ. People will, of course, still have their own views. I think the point is at the moment, the best anyone can hope to achieve if they do really want flying is to try and advance the idea that the best argument that can be said is it's probably not fair for those players to not have flying for a very long time, have it for a few months, and then not again. Again, it might come back. I mean, we don't know what's coming after Argus. We know there's content coming after Argus. We don't know what it is. Maybe it's more content on Argus. Maybe it's back to the Broken Short. Maybe it's something else entirely. But I do understand the argument of we've only effectively had it for a few months in terms of use. Yes, we sometimes still go to the Broken Shore to do Emissary, really, and to do Mythic Plus Dungeons. Well, that is just a convenience thing. That's all it is. You know, all of us, you sort of self-fulfilling prophecy there. You're making flying about convenience when it could be other things as well. But those are my views. Those are Blizzard's views. Those are lots of other people's views. Let me know what yours are in the comments below. Thanks very much for watching. It's been a long one, this one. If you've enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.